Welcome to The Debate.
Today, we're tackling, well, what you might call the ultimate intellectual wrecking ball, the radical anti-philosophy of U.G. Krishnamurti.
Exactly. We are diving deep into his very provocative assertion that the core dilemmas plaguing humanity, spiritual yearning, moral ambiguity, all of it, are not psychological battles at all, but are fundamentally neurological and biological malfunctions.
And the question that raises is pretty stark. Does this biological reductionism render all traditional seeking, from meditation to morality, not just irrelevant, but actually harmful?
I think it does. I maintain that UG is fundamentally correct. The self, the mind, is a myth rooted in biological processes, and any psychological effort toward transformation is therefore just pure self-deception. It's structurally incapable of achieving its own goal.
And I'll argue that while UG's critique of the whole spiritual business is, incredibly incisive, the physiological process he described is unique to him. It's non-transferable. And that leaves a necessary functional gap for the rest of us. If there's no pathway to his natural state, then traditional, if deeply flawed, approaches still serve an essential stabilizing role.
Well, let's get into my position. UG's message is just relentlessly clear, and it all centers on this one idea. The mind is a myth. What we cherish as the I or the soul or the ego is, in his words, nothing more than a collection of inherited knowledge just constantly repeating itself. It's a conditioned response system.
Mm-hmm.
And this knowledge base, which UV basically equated with thought and time, is the entire source of our conflict, because it desperately seeks permanence, whether that's lasting happiness or God or moksha. Thought is just the repeating past projecting itself, which then creates an imaginary future. The conflict, the struggle, only exists because the past, through thought, tries to govern the present moment, which is a biological reality.
So the only way out isn't psychological.
Not at all. The only path, according to him, is purely physiological. It involves a catastrophe, as he called it, a dramatic physical shift that destroys that self-identifying structure and leads to the body being somehow restarted. The result is just a calmly and continuously functioning, exclusively intelligent, and sensitively responding biological mechanism. Nothing more. And this all rests on his assertion that all our elaborate philosophies cannot compare with the innate wisdom of the body, which just wants to survive and multiply. It doesn't need any spiritual or moral scaffolding for that.
I approach this analysis from a slightly different angle. While I agree that UG successfully dismantles the delusion of spiritual progress, and he exposes how the quest for freedom is really just a pursuit of ultimate enjoyment that the body can't sustain, his framework leaves us with no practical entry point. There's no way in.
He would say that's the point.
Sure, but he himself repeatedly acknowledged this. He said, "I cannot help you solve your fundamental dilemma or save you from self-deception. And if I cannot help you, then nobody can." So, if the search for meaning is a false and absurd goal, as he suggests, you have this huge paradox. Why did he engage in hours upon hours of conversation answering questions, effectively creating his own intellectual tradition of negation? The fundamental human predicament involves suffering and fear, and we need shared action. Even if we accept that it's all neurotic, it still requires some governing structure for society to function. Rejecting all belief systems, calling them merely thoughts, well, it just leaves the vast majority of people who are not capable of realizing their situation to just react with the mind. It leads to a kind of psychological inertia. The tool of thought, however flawed, has to be managed somehow.
But we need to dive deeper into that mechanical function of thought, because that's really the linchpin of his entire non-philosophy. G is arguing that thought isn't a solution. It actively creates the problem of the self and the search.
Right.
Thought, in his view, is purely mechanical. It's just a reaction driven by accumulated memory, not some spontaneous action. And critically, it is shared. He insists there is no your mind and my mind. The individual ego is just a concept that we project onto this collective mechanical structure of knowledge. All the chaos, all the seeking, the spiritual struggle we see, it's a direct result of intervening thought, which prevents the body's natural intelligence from operating. Thought stops the present from being what it is by constantly labeling it and comparing it to the past. So the central truth is that all thought is just a reaction. It's past data responding to present stimuli, and that prevents any genuine unconditioned action.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. If thought is this collective mechanical mechanism, as he claims, then we're faced with the contradiction of his own existence as a communicator. I mean, the source material itself says that this shared sphere of thought is necessary for adequate and reasonable communication and action in this world. So if thought is a tool we use for society to function, to recognize objects, to negotiate, and, crucially, to articulate a radical anti-philosophy, then the effort to refine that tool, however futile that spiritual effort might be in the long run, becomes a necessary if flawed process. We have to manage the harmful social consequences the tool creates. The very fact that UG could sit there and articulate the destruction of his self-identifying structure using complex language proves that mechanical thought is essential for a functional existence.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. That brings us directly to the function of effort itself. The true radicalism of UG is in his deconstruction of effort, even the attempt to be good. All spiritual effort, meditation, yoga, cultivating virtue, he describes it as violence. He sees the attempt to force the mind into a state of peace as just a continuation of war and struggle. It's a psychological battle that just increases internal conflict and, paradoxically, cruelty in the world.
Okay.
The core illusion, the main disease, isn't a specific fault we have, but the overarching desire for moksha, liberation, or self-realization. This desire, because it's the highest goal imposed by culture, has to be eliminated first. Only then can our other desires fall into their natural rhythm, which is just the body wanting to survive. Trying to achieve an opposite state, to become altruistic instead of egoistic, for instance, using thought, just strengthens the original problem because the tool of comparison and goal setting is the problem. He sees meditation not as a path to peace, but as a battleground that leads to more conflict.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because while rejecting the highest goal is, intellectually clean, it offers no practical framework for most of human existence, which is defined by conflict and the need for restraint. Mullah himself acknowledges that society is amoral by its very nature, but he still says the problem is rooted in fear and the desire to escape suffering. So, if change is impossible through psychological effort and violence is just part of evolution, what value does his non-path hold for a species that requires some form of societal organization and ethical restraint?
But that's a societal question, not a biological one.
It is, but the rejection of all ethics as merely thoughts seems to lead directly to an ethical void. If the only biological impulse is to survive and multiply, and morality is just this destructive external imposition, Why should anyone restrict any violent or selfish impulse? The argument that the body's wisdom will just take over, it seems to rely on this hope that the survival instinct will override our aggressive impulses. But we have no evidence that's true on a collective scale without some structured rules.
I think we have to shift our focus entirely to the physical reality of the transformation he described, because that is the only verifiable truth he ever offered. He emphasizes this is an empirical event, not a philosophical conclusion. He explicitly details these profound physical changes: the collapse of the thought structure at the cellular and chromosomal level, violent spasms, what he called cell ionization. He often referred to it as a physical death, where the body is somehow restarted.
Right, the calamity.
Exactly, and the result is a radically different physiological mechanism. For example, he spoke of the body achieving a state he called a hermaphrodite nature, which isn't a biological sex change, but his way of describing the body's energy flowing freely, unblocked by conditioned thought, allowing it to function in balance. He also cited a heightened sensitivity to celestial bodies, to light. The crucial point here is that this is not an experience that can be sought or transmitted. It's a unique, terrifying physiological event, which is why he always warned that trying to repeat it is just doomed to failure.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that the non-transferability is precisely where the utility of this whole framework breaks down? While the description of the event is fascinating, we have to consider the implications of its uniqueness. He repeatedly warns that seeking to replicate it will fail. He even goes further, stating the terrifying implication: if that which you are aiming for actually happens to you, you will die. Physical death must occur in that state.
A terrifying prospect, yes.
So, if the solution to the human dilemma is so deeply physical, unique, terrifying, and can't be imitated, then Yuji's discourse just serves as a powerful description of an endpoint that is biologically inaccessible to everyone else. It functions as this stunning intellectual dead end. It confirms for the listener that there is no way out through effort or understanding, but it provides no means for grappling with the false but persistent psychological structures that drive daily life. Yuji gives the diagnosis: the mechanism is flawed, but then he locks the door to the cure, forcing everyone to keep using the only tools they have: thought and effort.
The fundamental tension remains. Humanity is driven toward total destruction because the mind which unites all knowledge and all experience of humanity has created this idea of psychological evolution and progress, which Yuji says are false. Only technology truly progresses. Our psychological frameworks, born of the past, have led us to this inevitable violent end. The only relief, the only path away from that outcome, is to cease all effort, to stop seeking meaning or purpose, and recognize with brutal honesty that life is just what it is. This stopping of psychological interference is, according to him, the body's own defense mechanism trying to assert itself.
We have to acknowledge Yu's incisive critique of how human seeking, the search for God, for peace, for freedom, is just a variation of the pursuit of ultimate enjoyment, a neurotic disorder the body can't sustain. It demands permanence in a system that's designed for constant change. However, the listener is left with this inescapable challenge: balancing this radical biological reductionism against the persistent, defining nature of our psychological dilemma. Whether it's illusory or not, that dilemma continues to demand frameworks for ethical action, for social cohesion, for just getting through the day.
The material really compels us to see our deepest convictions, even the quest for truth itself, as potentially rooted in illusion, a simple, repetitive mechanism of the past. It reinforces the profound value of subjecting all beliefs, even the belief in transformation itself, to a rigorous biological challenge.
And there is so much more to explore in how we cope when we're told that the very tools we use for coping are in fact the source of all our suffering.